France, during this period, and indeed for centuries past, was a society based on the feudal system and was organized into 3 estates. This division was set up along the ancient lines of those who pray, those who fight, and those who work. The first estate consisted of the clergy, including all churches and all of the king's clerics. The clergy was exempt from paying any taxes due to their religious standing. Citizens were required to pay 1/10 of their income to the church as tithes that maintained the lifestyle of the first estate. Local churches remained poor as funds were sent on to church leaders in Paris, so the people knew their money was not being used in their communities. The second estate consisted of France's aristocracy, those considered to be of noble birth. This group also did not pay taxes, except during wartime, and even then it was usually not enforced. As many in the aristocracy were landlords and owners of mills, wine presses, and bakeries, the common people were required to pay rent on land they farmed and taxes on equipment they used, and this money maintained the lifestyle of the members of the second estate. The third estate included merchants, artisans, peasants, and all the rest of the working class. This group carried most of the tax burden of the nation. In difficult times, when harvests were poor, the taxes were devastating, and peasants would often starve to death during a harsh winter. The system set up rigid classes of people and allowed for very little mobility. Generally, a person was expected to live as a member of the class into which they were born. Members of the third estate were blocked from holding even the lowest position of power in the government that would allow them to improve quality of life. It was also impossible for the third estate to make changes within the law to better their situation, because the first 2 estates together held the power to overrule any changes that would negatively affect their wealth and power. With the guidance of Enlightenment thinking, the members of the third estate were beginning to realize the system needed to be changed in order for their lives to change. With the economy in ruins and the countryside in a state of unrest, Louis XVI was forced to take action. In 1786, Charles Alexandre de Calonne, the Controller General, suggested a solution that involved a major financial reform through a universal land tax that did not exempt the upper classes, an action that was extremely unpopular with the powerful nobility. Because it was necessary to bring in greater taxes from somewhere, and the clergy and nobility were resistant, the king appointed men of non-noble origins as his finance ministers. One of these commoners, Jacques Necker, was popular with the people because he proposed many reforms to the tax laws that would help lift some of the burden on the citizenry, specifically attempts to reduce the expenses of the court. Unfortunately, most of his reforms failed. As a further step in the plan to deal with the worsening economic situation and public unrest, the king summoned the Estates General, a group of representatives from all 3 classes of society: the clergy, the nobility, and the non-aristocratic third estate, which had not met in over 100 years. The meeting took place in May 1789 at the Palace of Versailles. The representatives came prepared with lists of grievances to be addressed by the Assembly. All three pushed for reforms to economic and judicial policies, reflecting the general depression in the economy. But the third estate wanted major policy changes, including equal representation in government, as opposed to the upper classes having all the power and none of the tax burden. Predictably, the three groups could not agree on reforms that would take power and privilege away from the clergy and aristocracy. Frustrated by the stalemate, the Third Estate met separately and formed the National Assembly to formulate their goals for the meeting of the Estates Generale. They took on the task of writing a new constitution for France, based on Enlightenment ideas for equality, and invited the other two groups to contribute. Many in the clergy and even some of the nobility joined in seeking greater societal reform. A few days into this process, the king, concerned by the direction the National Assembly was heading, especially with regard to taxes, ordered the building they had been using as a discussion space to be locked in an attempt to block the meeting. The group rightly feared that this was a precursor to ending the meeting of the Estates Generale without affecting any changes. Denied their meeting hall, the National Assembly gathered in an indoor tennis court nearby and took what would become to be known as the tennis court oath, vowing not to disband even if the king ended the formal assembly of the Estates Generale until they had achieved the constitutional reform they championed. Because many of the representatives of the clergy and nobility joined the cause, King Louis was forced to continue the assembly of the Estates Generale, but now restructured and repurposed as the new National Assembly.